On Christmas Eve, my wife ran away with her lover and left me with our 4 young daughters. Years later, she was speechless when she saw what had become of us. The aroma of roasted turkey filled the house, blending with the sweet scent of cinnamon and apple. Thomas, 35, adjusted his apron as he watched his 4 daughters decorating Christmas cookies at the kitchen table. Sophie, the oldest at 10, frowned in concentration as she carefully applied icing to a gingerbread star. Claire, 8, giggled as she covered her snowman cookie with colorful sprinkles. Anne, 6, ended up with more icing on herself than on the cookies, while little Marie, only 4, watched everything with wide eyes, eager to join in. "Daddy, has Mommy arrived yet?" asked Marie, her high-pitched voice cutting through the kitchen chatter. Thomas felt a tightness in his chest. Where was Isabel? She had promised to be home early to help with the preparations. "She must be on her way, sweetheart," he replied, forcing a smile. As he stirred the sauce in the pan, Thomas couldn't avoid a flashback. 5 years earlier, Isabel laughed, throwing her head back, her brown hair shining under the Christmas tree lights. "Thomas, you're impossible," she exclaimed, while he tried to balance an absurd pile of presents in his arms. "Impossible to resist, you mean?" he replied with a wink, making her laugh even more. Sophie, then 5, ran around the room, closely followed by Claire, 3. "Mommy! Daddy! Look what we made!" they shouted in unison, holding up colorful drawings of reindeer. Thomas put the presents down and joined the family on the sofa. Isabel, pregnant with Anne, stroked her belly while admiring the girls' drawings. The moment was perfect, full of love, joy, and promises of a bright future. Present. The sound of something burning brought Thomas back to reality. "Darn!" he exclaimed, quickly taking the casserole off the heat. The girls looked startled. "Is everything okay, Daddy?" asked Sophie, her voice full of concern. "Yes, dear, I just got a bit distracted," he replied, trying to sound carefree. But inside, anxiety was growing. Where on earth was Isabel? Hours passed. Dinner was ready, the table set, gifts under the tree. But no sign of Isabel. The girls, initially excited, were starting to become restless and worried. "What if something happened to Mommy?" Claire whispered to Sophie, fear shining in her eyes. Thomas tried to remain calm, but his heart pounded in his chest. He had already called Isabel's phone dozens of times, always voicemail. Unanswered messages piled up. Finally, when the clock struck 9, Thomas decided they could wait no longer. "Girls, let's have dinner. I'm sure Mommy has a good explanation." That's when he noticed the envelope on the small table in the hall. How had he not seen it before? With trembling hands, he opened it. "Thomas, I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore. I love the girls, but I need to find myself. I'm leaving with John. Please take care of them, Isabel." Thomas's world collapsed. John, the new partner at her company. How? When? A sob brought him back to reality. Marie was crying, clinging to Sophie's leg. "Where's Mommy?" she asked through tears. Thomas looked at his daughters, their faces confused, scared, hurt. How would he explain? How to save their Christmas? How to save the family? Swallowing the lump in his throat, Thomas knelt down, opening his arms. "Come here, my little ones," he called, his voice choked up. As the girls ran into his embrace, Thomas knew his life had changed forever. The challenge ahead was immense, but looking at his daughters' faces, he made a silent promise. No matter what happened, he would protect them. They were his life now. "How about we each open one present before dinner?" he suggested, trying to inject some cheer into his voice. Their eyes lit up, momentarily forgetting their mother's absence. As the girls ran to the tree, Thomas took a deep breath. This would be the longest night of his life, but he would find a way to get through it. For his daughter's sake, he had to be strong. The Christmas that should have been filled with joy and family unity had turned into the start of an unknown and frightening journey. But Thomas was determined to face it, one step at a time, beginning with saving this night for his girls. The alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., jolting Thomas from a restless sleep. He got up automatically, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. It had been only 3 weeks since Isabel left, but it felt like an eternity. Thomas dragged himself to the bathroom, avoiding looking at the empty side of the bed. While shaving, his mind raced through the endless list of tasks for the day. Make breakfast, get the girls ready for school, drop them off at their respective places, get to work in time for the 9 a.m. meeting, remember to pick up Claire's ballet uniform from the cleaners. A sharp scream interrupted his thoughts. "Anne," he muttered, recognizing his 6-year-old's cry. Running to her room, he found the girl sitting in bed, tears streaming down her round little face. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked, sitting down beside her. "I dreamed about Mommy," Anne sobbed, throwing herself into her father's arms. "Why won't she come back, Daddy?" Thomas's heart clenched. "I don't know, my love," he answered honestly, stroking her hair. "But I'm here, okay? Daddy is here." After calming Anne, Thomas returned to his room to get dressed, only to find Sophie, 10, rummaging through his drawers. "What are you doing?" he asked, surprised. Sophie turned, her eyes flashing with anger. "Looking for money. I need to buy materials for a school project." "Why didn't you ask me?" "You're never home," she shouted. "And when you are, you're too busy with the little ones." Before Thomas could respond, Sophie ran out of the room, slamming the door. He sighed deeply, feeling completely inadequate to handle this situation. In the kitchen, he found Claire 8, already dressed and silently eating a piece of toast. Since Isabel's departure, Claire had become strangely quiet and independent. "Good morning, Princess," Thomas tried, smiling at her. Claire just nodded, not looking up from her plate. As he prepared coffee and organized lunchboxes, Thomas heard the familiar sound of small footsteps coming down the stairs. Marie 4 appeared in the kitchen doorway, clutching her teddy bear. "Daddy, is Mommy coming back today?" she asked innocently, as she did every morning. Thomas felt a lump in his throat. "I don't know, sweetheart. Let's have breakfast, okay?" The next 45 minutes were a whirlwind of activity, dressing Marie, convincing Anne to stop crying and get ready, begging Sophie to hurry up, and trying, unsuccessfully, to engage Claire in conversation. When he finally managed to get them all in the car, Thomas was already exhausted, and the day had barely begun. He dropped Marie at nursery, Anne and Claire at primary school, and finally Sophie at secondary school. Each goodbye was a challenge. Marie clung to him crying, Anne begged to stay home, Claire left without a word, and Sophie practically jumped out of the car before it had fully stopped. Arriving at the office with only 5 minutes to spare before the meeting, Thomas felt like a failure in every aspect of his life. How could he be a good father and a competent professional at the same time? The meeting was a disaster. Thomas couldn't concentrate, his mind constantly drifting back to the girls. His boss, Mr. Peterson, called him in after the presentation. "Thomas, I understand you're going through a difficult time," he said, his tone a mixture of concern and frustration. "But we need you fully present here. The company can't carry the weight of your personal situation indefinitely." Thomas nodded, feeling humiliated and scared. He couldn't lose this job, not now. The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls, emails, and unfinished tasks. At 5:30 p.m., Thomas rushed out to pick up the girls, praying he wasn't late. Arriving home, exhausted and discouraged, Thomas faced 4 hungry and irritable girls. While he tried to prepare a decent dinner with the few ingredients in the fridge, Sophie complained about needing help with homework. Claire refused to eat. Anne cried for her mother, and Marie spilled juice on the carpet. It was at this moment of total chaos that the doorbell rang. Surprised, Thomas opened the door to find Mrs. Thompson, his elderly neighbor, holding a large covered dish. "Good evening, Thomas," she said with a gentle smile. "I thought you and the girls might like some homemade shepherd's pie." The delicious aroma wafting from the dish made Thomas's stomach growl. "Mrs. Thompson, I don't know what to say. This is so kind of you." The grey-haired lady shrugged. "We're neighbors, aren't we? And neighbors look after each other." She glanced past Thomas at the chaos in the living room. "You know, I'd love to get to know your girls better. If you need help, I'm right next door." Thomas felt tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, genuinely touched by her offer. After Mrs. Thompson left, dinner went surprisingly smoothly. The shepherd's pie was delicious, and even Claire ate without complaining. For the first time in weeks, there were moments of laughter at the table. Later, with the girls finally in bed, Thomas allowed himself to collapse on the sofa. He looked around the messy living room, piles of laundry, toys scattered, dishes in the sink. The task of being a single father seemed impossible, but then his eyes fell on a drawing Marie had made that day. A clumsy figure, supposedly him, surrounded by 4 smiling girls. Below, in crooked letters, it read, "Best Daddy in the World." Thomas felt a wave of determination. It wouldn't be easy, but he would find a way. For his girls, he would learn to be the father they needed. Standing up, he began tidying the living room. Tomorrow would be another day, another challenge. But now he knew he wasn't completely alone. With unexpected help from people like Mrs. Thompson and, above all, the love of his daughters, Thomas would take it one step at a time on this new journey. As he folded a pile of clothes, he made a silent promise to himself and his daughters. They would not only survive this change, but find a way to thrive together, as the family they still were. The clock read 6:30 when Thomas entered the kitchen, already dressed for work. To his surprise, he found Sophie, now 11, making sandwiches. "Good morning, Dad," she said, not looking up from her task. "I made coffee. It's in the pot." Thomas hesitated, a mix of gratitude and worry in his chest. "Thank you, sweetheart. But you didn't have to wake up so early." Sophie shrugged. "Someone has to do it, right?" Those words, said so naturally, hit Thomas like a punch to the gut. In just 1 year, his oldest daughter had grown up too much, too fast. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced the arrival of the other girls. Claire, 9, entered silently, grabbing her sandwich without a word. Anne, 7, still sleepy, snuggled into her father's lap, while Marie, 5, chattered happily about a dream involving unicorns. Thomas watched his daughters, amazed at how much they had changed in the last year. The routine they had established was fragile but worked, most of the time. "Sophie, could you take Marie to nursery today?" Thomas asked, checking his watch. "I have an early meeting and—" "Sure, Dad," Sophie interrupted, her voice a mixture of resignation and a hint of resentment. "I'll handle it." Thomas felt a pang of guilt. He knew he was asking too much of Sophie, but often saw no alternative. Later at the office, Thomas found himself distracted again, his mind drifting homeward. Had Sophie managed to drop off Marie without problems? Claire was becoming more withdrawn. Maybe he should schedule a therapy appointment for her. And Anne, always so sensitive. How was she doing at school? Earth to Thomas. The voice of Samantha, his co-worker, brought him back to reality. "You're daydreaming again, huh?" Thomas gave an embarrassed smile. "Sorry, Sam." "It's the girl—" I know," she interrupted kindly. "Listen, some of us are going out for a drink after work. Why don't you come with us? You need to relax a bit." The offer was tempting. When was the last time he went out just for fun? "I don't know, Sam, the girl—" "Come on, Thomas," insisted Mark, another colleague, joining the conversation. "You can't live only for the kids. Who knows, maybe you'll meet someone nice." Thomas felt his face heat up. The idea of meeting someone, maybe dating again, seemed almost a betrayal. But was it really? Isabel had moved on. Why couldn't he? "All right," he finally agreed. "I'll see if Mrs. Thompson can watch the girls for a few hours." The bar was crowded, the music louder than Thomas would have liked. Still, it was nice to be among adults, talking about something other than homework and ballet schedules. That's when she appeared. Red hair, bright green eyes, a smile that lit up the entire place. "Thomas, this is Olivia," Samantha introduced. "She's new in the marketing department." Olivia extended her hand, her touch sending an electric current up Thomas's arm. "Nice to meet you, Thomas. Sam has told me a lot about you." For the first time in a long while, Thomas allowed himself to smile genuinely. Maybe, just maybe, life could offer new possibilities. The sound of his cell phone interrupted the moment. It was Sophie. "Dad, Marie has a fever. I think we need to take her to the doctor." And just like that, as quickly as it appeared, the moment of normality was gone. Thomas apologized hastily and rushed home, conflicted feelings of guilt and frustration churning in his chest. In the weeks that followed, Thomas found himself thinking about Olivia more often than he cared to admit. They texted, talked during lunch at work. She was fun, intelligent, and most importantly, understood his situation with the girls, but each time he considered inviting her out properly, something happened. Claire had an anxiety attack at school. Anne got chickenpox and passed it to Marie. Sophie, overwhelmed, and exploded during dinner, accusing Thomas of not doing enough at home. And then, almost without noticing, the year was coming to an end. Stores began displaying Christmas decorations, and Thomas felt a tightness in his chest. The first Christmas without Isabel had been tough, but somehow this second one seemed even worse. "Dad?" Sophie's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She stood at the office door, looking strangely vulnerable. Can we not celebrate Christmas this year?" Thomas felt his heart break. "Oh, Sophie," he said, opening his arms. To his surprise, the normally independent preteen ran into his embrace, sobbing. "I miss her," Sophie confessed through tears. "I know I shouldn't after what she did, but—" "Shh, it's okay," Thomas consoled her, fighting back his own tears. "It's normal to miss her." "I miss her too." That night, after putting the girls to bed, Thomas sat alone in the dark living room, looking at the still unassembled Christmas tree in the corner. The year had been a roller coaster of emotions and challenges. There were times he thought he wouldn't make it, that the weight of single parenthood would crush him. But there were also moments of unexpected joy. The first tooth Marie lost, the flute solo Claire played at the school recital, finally stepping out of her shell, the look of pride on Anne's face when she learned to ride a bike without training wheels, and Sophie, his little warrior, growing up too fast, but with such a big heart. Thomas picked up his phone, looking at Olivia's last message. "Hope you have a great weekend with your girls." He smiled slightly, feeling a twinge of hope. Maybe, next year, he would be ready to take that step. For now, his focus was his daughters. Standing, Thomas began to assemble the Christmas tree. Tomorrow, he would suggest to the girls that they make new ornaments together. They would create new traditions, new memories. The year had been full of challenges, yes, but also of growth, of strengthened bonds. And as he hung the first ornament on the tree, Thomas made a silent promise. Next year will be even stronger. Together. The sound of the doorbell echoed through the sunny Saturday afternoon. Thomas, busy helping Marie with a puzzle, frowned. He wasn't expecting any visitors. "Sophie, could you get the door, please?" he called, assuming it was a friend of one of the girls. Seconds later, a sharp cry cut through the air. "Dad! Dad, come here! Hurry!" The panic in Sophie's voice made Thomas jump from his chair. He ran to the door, his heart pounding. Nothing could have prepared him for the scene he found. There, standing on the doorstep, was Isabel. 2 years had passed, but Thomas would recognize her anywhere. Her hair was shorter now, a few new lines around her eyes. But it was her. The woman who had abandoned him, who had left her daughters, was back. Isabel. His voice came out as a hoarse whisper. She took a hesitant step forward, tears shining in her eyes. "Thomas, I've come back." The world seemed to freeze for a moment. Thomas felt an avalanche of emotions, shock, anger, hurt, and, surprisingly, a twinge of relief. He struggled to remain composed, conscious of Sophie standing beside him, trembling. "Girls," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Go to your rooms, please." "But Dad," Sophie began, her eyes darting between Thomas and the mother she hadn't seen in 2 years. "Now, Sophie," Thomas insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, Sophie went upstairs. Thomas could hear the confused whispers of Anne and Claire, and Marie's quiet sobbing. Turning to Isabel, he took a deep breath. "Come in," he said simply, stepping aside. In the living room, silence was palpable. Isabel seemed out of place, an intruder in a home that was once hers. Her eyes roamed over the photos on the walls, noting how the girls had grown, moments she had missed. "Why are you here?" Thomas finally broke the silence, his voice a mixture of exhaustion and apprehension. Isabel sank into the sofa, looking smaller and more fragile than Thomas remembered. "I made a terrible mistake, Thomas. The biggest mistake of my life." She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "John, he wasn't who I thought he was. He lied to me, manipulated me, made me believe we had a future together, but it was all a sham. Thomas felt a wave of anger rising in his chest. And that justifies abandoning your daughters, abandoning our family. No, Isabel answered, tears now streaming freely down her face. Nothing justifies what I did. I was confused, depressed. I felt like I was suffocating here, but I was wrong, so terribly wrong. She looked directly into Thomas's eyes. He left me, Thomas, 6 months ago. Left me with nothing, in a foreign country. It took all this time to gather the courage and money to return. Thomas fought the impulse to comfort Isabel. A part of him, the part that still loved her despite everything, wanted to hold her and say it would be okay. But the larger part, the one that had spent 2 years rebuilding a life for himself and his daughters, remained firm. What do you want, Isabel? He asked, his voice tired. A second chance, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. With you, with the girls, I know I don't deserve it, but they're my daughters, Thomas. I love them. I love you. I made the worst mistake possible, but I'm here to try to fix it if you'll let me. Before Thomas could answer, a noise on the staircase drew his attention. All 4 girls were there, Sophie in front, her arm protectively around Marie. Mommy. Marie's small voice broke the silence. Her big blue eyes, so much like Isabel's, were wide with confusion and hope. Isabel sobbed, reaching out her arms. Oh, my baby. Marie made a move to run to her mother, but Sophie held her back. The oldest girl's face was a mask of contained fury. You have no right, she said through gritted teeth. You have no right to just show up and pretend nothing happened. Claire, always the quiet one, simply turned and ran back to her room, the sound of the door slamming echoing through the house. Anne, for her part, seemed frozen, unable to move or speak. Thomas found himself torn between comforting his daughters and dealing with the impossible situation before him. He chose the first, going upstairs to hug Marie and Anne, while casting a meaningful look at Sophie. Take care of them for a minute, okay? He asked quietly. Sophie nodded, still shooting daggers at Isabel. Back in the living room, Thomas found Isabel quietly sobbing. Part of him wanted to comfort her, but the hurt and distrust were too strong. You can't just come back and expect everything to return to normal, Isabel, he said, his voice firm but not cruel. You have no idea what we went through, what I went through to keep this family united and happy. Isabel nodded, wiping her tears. I know. I don't expect it to be easy or quick, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Thomas. Please, let me explain everything to the girls, to try to fix what I broke. Thomas closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. How could he make this decision? How could he deny his daughters the chance to reconnect with their mother? But at the same time, how could he risk their already wounded hearts? Not today, he said finally. The girls are in shock. I'm in shock. We need time to process this. Isabel seemed to deflate but nodded. I understand. Can I at least say goodbye to them? Thomas hesitated, but agreed. He called the girls back. The scene that followed was tense and emotionally charged. Marie clung to her mother, crying. Anne approached timidly, allowing a brief hug. Claire refused to leave her room. And Sophie? Sophie stood with arms crossed, a protective wall around her sisters. When Isabel finally left, promising to be in touch soon, Thomas felt completely drained. He looked at his daughters, their faces a mix of conflicting emotions, and knew that the coming days would be the most challenging they had ever faced. That night, after hours of conversation, tears, and promises that everything would be okay, Thomas finally allowed himself a moment alone. Sitting on the porch, looking up at the stars, he wondered what the future would hold. Could he forgive Isabel? Could his daughters? And most importantly, would it be right to let her back into their lives after all the suffering she caused? He had no answers. But as the gentle night breeze brushed his face, Thomas made a silent promise to the stars. No matter what happened, he would protect his daughters' hearts with all his strength. The path ahead was uncertain, but he would face it one day at a time, for the sake of the family he had fought so hard to keep together. The week following Isabel's unexpected return was an emotional roller coaster for the family. Thomas felt as if he were walking through a minefield, each step carefully calculated to avoid an explosion of emotions. On Wednesday morning, the phone rang. Thomas answered, instantly recognizing the voice on the other end. "Thomas, it's Isabel. I'd like to talk. About the girls. About us. Please." He closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "All right," he replied after a long pause. "We can meet at the cafe near the park, tomorrow at 10 a.m. Also the next day, Thomas arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, his nerves on edge. Isabel was already there, looking as anxious as he felt. "Thank you for coming," she said softly when he sat down. Thomas nodded, finding no adequate words. Silence hung between them, heavy with unresolved hurt and unasked questions. Finally, Isabel spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "I know I have no right to ask this, but I want a second chance, Thomas. With you, with the girls. I know I caused terrible damage, but I'm willing to do anything to fix it." Thomas observed her, noticing the worry lines on her face and the regret in her eyes. Part of him wanted to believe her, to give her that chance. But the part that had spent 2 years rebuilding a shattered life remained cautious. "It's not that simple, Isabel," he replied, his voice low but firm. "You have no idea what we went through. The nights Marie cried herself to sleep calling for you. Anne's nightmares, how Claire completely shut down. And Sophie, she had to grow up so fast." Tears ran down Isabel's face as she listened. "I know I caused irreparable harm," she sobbed, "but please, give me a chance to fix it. I'll do therapy, whatever it takes. I just want the chance to be their mother again." Thomas took a deep breath. "It's not just me who needs to forgive, Isabel. It's the girls. And they're dealing with this in very different ways." He thought about how each of his daughters was reacting to the news of their mother's return. Sophie, 12 now, was furious. Her anger was palpable, a protective barrier around herself and her sisters. "She abandoned us," Sophie had shouted the night before. "How can she just come back and expect us to forgive her?" Claire, on the other hand, seemed cautiously hopeful. Thomas had found her looking through old family albums, tracing Isabel's face in the photos with a trembling finger. Anne, always the most sensitive, was confused and anxious. She alternated between moments of excitement at the possibility of having her mother back and crying fits, afraid of being abandoned again. And Marie, only 5, barely remembered Isabel. For her, the idea of a mother was more an abstract concept than a real memory. Thomas shared these observations with Isabel, watching the pain in her eyes intensify with each word. "I know it won't be easy," Isabel said after a moment, "but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Family therapy, supervised visits, anything. I just want the chance to show them I've changed, that I love them." Thomas leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the decision he had to make. Then he remembered the advice Mrs. Thompson had given him the day before. He had gone to the kind neighbor, desperate for some guidance. Mrs. Thompson listened patiently before speaking. "Thomas, dear," she said, her voice full of decades of wisdom, "forgiveness is not something you give all at once. It's a journey. And sometimes, giving someone a second chance is also giving yourself a second chance. To heal, to grow." Her words echoed now in Thomas's mind as he looked at Isabel. "Okay," he said finally, "let's try. But under conditions." Isabel's face lit up with hope. "Anything, Thomas, whatever it takes. First, you'll start therapy. Individual and eventually family therapy. Second, visits with the girls will be supervised at least at the start. Third, we follow their pace. If at any point it becomes too much for any of them, we stop. Understood?" Isabel nodded vigorously, tears of relief in her eyes. Yes, of course. Thank you, Thomas. I promise I won't let you down again." Thomas felt a lump in his throat. "Don't promise that," he said softly. "Just try. That's all we can do." In the weeks that followed, Thomas carefully watched how his daughters navigated these turbulent waters. The meetings with Isabel were a mix of intense emotions. Sophie remained distant and hostile, her eyes throwing daggers every time Isabel tried to approach. "You think you can show up after 2 years and pretend nothing happened?" she hissed during one visit. Thomas had to intervene, taking Sophie outside to calm down. Claire, on the other hand, seemed to blossom under Isabel's renewed attention. She hesitantly shared school stories, her eyes shining when Isabel showed genuine interest. Anne wavered between moments of affection and withdrawal. One minute she was in Isabel's arms, the next she hid behind Thomas, afraid of being left again. Marie, curious but cautious, treated Isabel almost like an interesting stranger, asking innocent questions that often left all the adults speechless. For Thomas, each visit was an exercise in self-control. Seeing Isabel with the girls rekindled memories of happier times, but also brought back the pain of betrayal. He remained cordial but distant, an emotional barrier firmly in place. One night, after a particularly intense visit, Thomas found himself once again on Mrs. Thompson's porch, seeking comfort in her wisdom. "You're doing the right thing, Thomas," she assured him, placing a steaming cup of tea in his hands. "Giving the girls a chance to rebuild this relationship is an act of love, even if it hurts." Thomas nodded, feeling tears he had long suppressed beginning to fall. "It's just, sometimes I wonder if I'm being strong enough for them, if I'm making the right decisions." Mrs. Thompson smiled kindly. "Strength isn't always about keeping people away, my dear. Sometimes true strength is allowing them to come close again, even at the risk of getting hurt. You're teaching your daughters about forgiveness and second chances. That's a valuable lesson." As Thomas pondered these words, he knew the road ahead would still be long and difficult. There would be more tears, more heated discussions, more moments of doubt. But looking at the starry sky, he felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, something beautiful could emerge from this turmoil. Not a restoration of what was lost, but the creation of something new. A redefined family, stronger for having been broken and carefully pieced back together. With that thought, Thomas stood, thanked Mrs. Thompson, and headed home. To his daughters, to the challenge of another day navigating these turbulent waters, but with hope that eventually they would find calmer seas. Autumn sunlight filtered through the curtains of the living room, where Isabel sat on the sofa with Marie on her lap, leafing through a storybook. Thomas watched from the kitchen, his eyes attentive to every interaction, every hesitant smile, every moment of connection. And so, the ugly duckling discovered he was actually a beautiful swan. Isabel read softly, her finger tracing the words on the page. Marie looked up, her big eyes full of curiosity. "Mommy, were you an ugly duckling too? Is that why you left?" The silence that followed was deafening. Isabel froze, her hands trembling slightly. Thomas took a step forward, ready to intervene, but Isabel took a deep breath and replied, "No, sweetheart. Mommy made a very big mistake. But I'm here now, trying to be a swan for you." Marie seemed to consider this for a moment before turning her attention back to the book. Thomas felt his heart tighten. Marie's innocence was both a blessing and a curse in this complicated situation. Later that day, Isabel tried to connect with Anne, now 8. They were in the backyard, Isabel helping Anne plant some flowers. "Look, Mom," Anne said, holding a delicate seedling. "This one is going to be daisies." Isabel smiled, genuinely delighted. "How lovely, Anne. You've always loved flowers, haven't you? I remember when—" She stopped abruptly, realizing that the memory she was about to share was from before she left. Anne noticed her hesitation and her face fell. "You don't remember anything about me, do you?" Anne murmured, tears shining in her eyes. "Oh, Anne, that's not it," Isabel tried to explain, reaching out to touch her daughter's shoulder. But Anne stepped back, dropping the seedling and running into the house. Thomas Eads, who had been watching from the porch, quickly went after Anne, throwing a warning glance at Isabel. He found Anne curled up on her bed, sobbing. "Hey, Princess," he said softly, sitting beside her. "Want to talk about what happened?" Anne threw herself into her father's arms, tears soaking his shirt. "Why did she come back, Dad? We were okay without her, weren't we?" Thomas felt his heart break. "Oh, Anne," he whispered, stroking her hair. "It's complicated, sweetheart. Your mom made mistakes, but she loves you. She's trying to fix things." "But what if she leaves again?" Anne sobbed. Thomas had no easy answer for that. He just held his daughter tighter, silently promising that no matter what, he would always be there for her. The days passed, and every interaction between Isabel and the girls felt like an emotional tightrope. Claire, now 10, was the most receptive, eager to reconnect with her mother. But even that relationship wasn't free of complications. One afternoon, Isabel arrived to take Claire for a walk in the park, something Thomas had reluctantly agreed to. "I'm so excited to show you my new skateboard tricks, Mom," Claire exclaimed, grabbing her helmet. Isabel frowned, confused. "Skateboard? But you were always afraid of riding one." Claire's smile faltered. "That was a long time ago, Mom. I learned last summer. Dad taught me." An awkward silence fell over them. Isabel struggled for the right words, painfully aware of how much she had missed. Thomas, observing the scene, felt a mix of pride and sadness. Pride in Claire's growth, sadness at the obvious pain in both their eyes. Sophie, meanwhile, remained the most difficult. At 12, her anger and resentment formed an almost impenetrable barrier. "Sophie, honey," Isabel tried one day, finding her eldest daughter alone in the kitchen. "I made your favorite cookies. Remember how we used to bake them together?" Sophie looked from the plate of cookies to Isabel, her eyes cold. "My tastes have changed. I don't eat that kind of thing anymore." She left the kitchen, leaving Isabel alone with a plate of cookies and a broken heart. Thomas, who had witnessed the exchange, sighed deeply. He knew Sophie was hurting, but her hostile attitude was making things even harder. Tensions reached a peak on an otherwise ordinary Thursday. Thomas was at work when he received a call from Marie's school. "Mr. Thomas, this is Mrs. Peterson, Marie's teacher. We had an incident today. We need you to come to the school immediately." Thomas's heart raced. "What happened? Is Marie okay?" "She's physically fine, but very upset. Please come as soon as possible." Thomas rushed to the school, 1,000 scenarios running through his mind. When he arrived, he found Marie sitting in the principal's office, crying quietly. To his surprise, Isabel was already there. "What's going on?" he asked, looking from Marie to Isabel and then to Mrs. Peterson. The teacher explained, "Today was Bring Your Parents' Day to talk about their jobs. Marie got very upset when Isabel appeared. She shouted to the entire class that Isabel wasn't her real mommy, that her real mommy had gone away long ago." Thomas closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the situation. Marie, confused and scared by Isabel's sudden reappearance, had expressed her conflicting feelings in the only way a 5-year-old knew how. Isabel looked pale, silent tears rolling down her face. I didn't know about the event. I came to bring Marie the lunch she forgot at home. I thought it would be a nice surprise." Thomas knelt in front of Marie. "Hey, princess. It's okay. We can go home now, all right?" Marie nodded, stretching her arms to her father. Thomas picked her up, feeling her small body tremble with suppressed sobs. On the way home, the silence in the car was heavy. Isabel sat in the passenger seat, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Marie had fallen asleep in the back seat, exhausted by emotional stress. Finally, Thomas spoke. "This isn't working, Isabel." She looked at him, her eyes full of pain and regret. "Thomas, I'm sorry. I just wanted—" "I know what you wanted," he interrupted, his voice tired. "But we can't go on like this. The girls are suffering. We need to reassess this situation." Isabel nodded slowly, swallowing a sob. "What do you suggest?" Thomas sighed deeply. "I think we need to take a step back. Maybe it's better if you focus on therapy sessions first, before trying unsupervised interactions." Silence fell between them again, broken only by Marie's soft breathing. When they arrived home, Thomas gently took Marie out of the car. Before going inside, he turned to Isabel. "I know you're trying, Isabel, but rebuilding broken bridges takes time. Sometimes we need to strengthen the foundations before crossing." Isabel nodded, fresh tears in her eyes. "I understand. I'll do whatever is best for the girls." Carrying Marie inside, Thomas knew the road ahead was still long and difficult. Rebuilding lost trust would not be easy, but for his daughter's sake, and he was willing to try. One step at a time, one bridge at a time, they would find their way through this emotional storm. The tension was palpable in the Durand living room. Thomas and Isabel sat on opposite ends of the sofa. the space between them heavy with unsaid words and repressed emotions. The children had been sent to their rooms, but the occasional sound of furtive footsteps upstairs indicated they were listening. "We can't keep going like this, Isabel," Thomas began, his voice tired but firm. "The girls are suffering. Marie barely recognizes you. Anne is constantly anxious, Claire is confused, and Sophie, well, you've seen how she is." Isabel nodded slowly, tears glistening in her eyes. "I know, Thomas. Believe me, I know. I'm trying, but trying isn't enough," Thomas exploded, years of repressed frustration finally surfacing. "You abandoned them. You left us with no explanation, no backward glance. How do you expect to fix that by just trying?" His words hung in the air, sharp and painful. Isabel shrank back as if she'd been physically struck. For a moment, only the ticking of the clock broke the tense silence. Then Isabel spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You think it was easy for me? That I just decided one day to leave my family?" Thomas scoffed, incredulous. "What else could it have been, Isabel? You ran off with another man." "I was sick, Thomas," Isabel shouted, tears now flowing freely. "I was fighting something I didn't even understand." Thomas paused, surprised by the intensity of her response. "What are you talking about?" Isabel took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "Postpartum depression," she said finally. "After Marie was born, I wasn't well, but I didn't know what was happening to me. I felt suffocated, inadequate, as if I were drowning and couldn't breathe." Thomas felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under him. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "I tried," Isabel responded, her voice breaking. "But you were so busy with work and with the girls, and I felt so guilty for not being the perfect mother I thought I should be. John, he seemed to understand, offered me an escape. I know now it was a terrible mistake, but at the time..." Thomas sank into the sofa, his mind spinning with this new information. Memories of Isabel crying for no apparent reason, her gradual isolation, took on a new, darker meaning. "I should have noticed," he murmured, more to himself than to Isabel. "I should have done something." "It's not your fault, Thomas," Isabel said softly. "I should have been clearer, should have sought help. But I was so lost." Silence fell again, but this time it was filled not with anger, but with shared sadness over missed opportunities and unrecognized pain. A muffled sob at the top of the stairs broke the moment. Thomas and Isabel turned to see Sophie standing there, tears streaming down her face. "Sophie," Thomas began, getting up, but the girl was already running back to her room. Isabel covered her face with her hands. "Oh God, how much did she hear?" Thomas sighed deeply. "Probably everything. She's always been the most perceptive." In the days that followed, it was clear that Isabel's revelation had shaken the whole family. Sophie became even more withdrawn, spending most of her time in her room. Claire, always the peacemaker, tried desperately to keep everyone together, often at the expense of her own emotions. Anne had a resurgence of nightmares, waking up screaming in the middle of the night. Even little Marie seemed to sense the change in atmosphere, becoming more clingy and less willing to be alone. Thomas watched his daughters with a heavy heart, realizing that the situation had become unsustainable. It was during another particularly difficult night, after calming Anne from another nightmare, that he made a decision. The next morning, he gathered the entire family in the living room. "We need help," he said simply, looking at each face in front of him. "All of us. What happened affected each of us differently, and we can't keep pretending we can handle it alone." Isabel, sitting in an armchair in the corner, nodded slowly. "I agree. I've already started seeing a therapist on my own. Maybe it's time to consider family therapy." Sophie, surprisingly, was the first to speak. "Will it make Mommy better? Will it make her stay forever?" The question, so simple yet so laden with hope and fear, made everyone's heart ache. "Oh, sweetheart," Isabel said softly. "Therapy isn't a magic cure, but it can help us understand each other better, heal the wounds we've created." Thomas knelt in front of his daughters. "It won't be easy. We'll have to talk about painful things, face difficult feelings, but I promise you we'll do it together. as a family. Claire, always practical, asked, "What if it doesn't work?" Thomas smiled gently. "Then we'll try something else. The important thing is that we're trying, we're fighting for our family." Slowly, one by one, the girls nodded. Even Sophie, still reluctant, gave a small nod of her head. As Thomas made the necessary calls to schedule the first family therapy session, he felt a mixture of apprehension and hope. The road to healing had only just begun, but together, step by step, they would face whatever lay ahead. The family's journey of healing had just begun, but they were all moving in the same direction now, united as the family they were always meant to be. Dr. Melissa Laurent's office was welcoming, with walls in soft shades and comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. The Durand family settled in nervously, Thomas and Isabel on opposite sides, the girls between them like a physical and emotional barrier. "Welcome," Dr. Laurent began with a gentle smile. "I'm glad you all decided to take this important step together. Remember, there are no right or wrong answers here. This is a safe space to express your feelings and thoughts." The first sessions were tense and uncomfortable. Sophie kept her arms crossed, her face a mask of studied indifference. Claire, always the peacemaker, tried to fill awkward silences with trivial school stories. Anne clung to Thomas's arm, while Marie played distractedly with the available toys, seemingly oblivious to the tension around her. It was during the third session that the first cracks began to appear in the family's carefully constructed facade. "Sophie," Dr. Laurent said softly, "you've been very quiet. Is there something you'd like to share?" Sophie looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Why should we trust her again?" she said, her voice trembling slightly. "She'll just leave again when things get hard." Isabel choked back a sob, the pain evident on her face. "Sophie, No," Sophie interrupted, years of pent-up hurt finally overflowing. "You don't know what it was like. I had to take care of my sisters. I had to be strong for them while you were out there living your life." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas felt his heart clench, realizing for the first time the true weight Sophie had carried. "Sophie," he began hesitantly, "I didn't realize. I should have seen how much you were suffering." Dr. Laurent nodded encouragingly. "Thomas, it seems you have something more to say." Thomas took a deep breath. I think I failed all of you. I was so focused on keeping things running, on being strong, that I didn't see how hard you were all struggling." This admission opened the floodgates. Claire, surprisingly, was next to speak. "I pretended everything was okay," she said quietly. "I thought if I was good enough, if I didn't cause any trouble, maybe Mom would come back." Anne sobbed openly. "I'm afraid to sleep," she confessed. "I'm afraid I'll wake up and find everyone gone." Even little Marie, who had been quiet until then, looked at Isabel with big, confused eyes. "Are you going to be my real mommy now?" Isabel covered her face with her hands, tears flowing through her fingers. "Oh God," she sobbed. "What have I done? I hurt all of you so deeply, Doctor." Laurent intervened gently. "Isabel, would you like to share how you feel hearing all this?" Isabel lifted her face, her eyes red and swollen. "I feel devastated, horrified by the pain I caused. I was so lost in my own darkness that I didn't see how it affected my family. I'm so sorry." The following sessions were equally intense. Thomas confronted his tendency to suppress emotions and avoid conflict, recognizing how it had contributed to the lack of communication in their marriage. "I thought I was protecting everyone by being strong," he admitted, "but really, I was just creating distance." Isabel, in turn, faced the consequences of her actions head-on. "I ran away from my problems instead of facing them," she said in one particularly emotional session. "I thought I was suffocating, but I was really just drowning in my own denial." The children, encouraged by the safe environment Dr. Laurent created, began expressing their fears and insecurities in surprising ways. Sophie made a collage representing her feelings, a chaotic mix of images of a happy family interspersed with cut-out words like abandonment and responsibility. Claire wrote a letter to her younger self, filled with words of comfort and promises that it wasn't her fault. Anne painted a somber picture of a house with a solitary figure in the window, revealing her constant fear of being left behind. Marie, in her innocence, drew a simple picture of the entire family holding hands, a silent wish for unity. As weeks turned into months, subtle changes began to occur. Sophie's angry outbursts became less frequent, replaced by hesitant conversations with Isabel about school and friends. Claire began to express her own needs and desires, instead of always trying to please others. Anne, with the help of relaxation techniques taught by Dr. Laurent, who started sleeping better. And Isabel. Isabel worked tirelessly to regain her family's trust, one small gesture at a time. In one of the last sessions of the year, Dr. Laurent asked each family member to share something they had learned during the process. Thomas spoke first. "I've learned that being strong doesn't mean hiding my feelings, but sharing them with the people I love." Isabel, tears in her eyes, said, "I've learned that love is a daily choice, and I must choose my family every day, no matter how hard it is." Sophie, her voice softer than it had been in months, shared, "I learned that it's okay not to be strong all the time, that I can ask for help." Claire smiled shyly. "I learned that my feelings matter too." Anne, clutching her favorite teddy bear, said, "I learned that it's okay to be afraid, but I don't have to be afraid alone." And Marie, with the simple wisdom of a child, concluded, "I learned that families can get hurt, but they can heal together too." Dr. Laurent smiled at the group. "You've all done incredible work. Remember, healing is an ongoing process. There will be ups and downs, but what matters is that you keep communicating and supporting each other." As the family left the office that day, there was a palpable sense of hope in the air. The path ahead would still be long and sometimes difficult, but now they had the tools to navigate it together. The Durand family's journey of healing was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, everyone felt they were moving in the right direction, united as the family they were always meant to be. Mr. Peterson's office was quiet, except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. Thomas sat rigidly in the chair across from his boss's desk, his hands clasped in his lap. "Thomas," Mr. Peterson began, a genuine smile on his face, "I have good news. The company is expanding, and we're opening a new office in Brighton. We'd like you to lead the team there." Thomas blinked, surprised. "Me? But you've done an exceptional job over the past few years, especially considering your personal circumstances," Mr. Peterson continued. "This is an incredible opportunity for your career." Thomas's mind spun. A promotion, a move to Brighton. What would this mean for his family, who had only recently begun to find some balance? I need to think about it," Thomas stammered. "Discuss it with my family." Mr. Peterson nodded understandingly. Of course, but please don't take too long. We need an answer by next week." That night, Thomas gathered the family in the living room. The girls settled on the sofa, curious about the unexpected family meeting. Isabel, who now spent more time with the family, although she still lived separately, sat in a nearby armchair. "I have important news," Thomas began, his voice betraying a bit of nervousness. "I've been offered a promotion at work." "That's great, Dad," Claire exclaimed, always the optimist. Thomas smiled tensely. "Yes, it's a big opportunity, but it involves a move to Brighton." The silence that followed was deafening. Sophie was the first to break it. "Move? But what about school, my friends?" Her voice rose an octave, panic evident. Anne grabbed Thomas's arm. "I don't want to go, Daddy. I like it here." Marie, now 6, seemed more confused than upset. "Does Brighton have ice cream?" Thomas couldn't help but chuckle at his youngest's innocence. "Yes, sweetheart, Brighton has ice cream." Isabel, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. "Thomas, this is a big change. How do you feel about it?" He sighed deeply. "Professionally, it's an amazing opportunity, but you girls are my priority. I won't make any decision without everyone's support." Claire, ever the voice of reason, asked, "Can we think about it a bit? Maybe make a list of pros and cons?" Thomas smiled, grateful for his practical daughter. "Of course, and sweetheart. Let's all think about it and talk again tomorrow." The next night, the family gathered again. The air was tense with expectation. So, Thomas began, what does everyone think about the move? Sophie, now 13 and in the height of her rebellious phase, spoke first. I hate the idea. I don't want to leave my friends, my school. Here it's not fair. Claire, however, seemed more open. I looked up Brighton. It seems like a cool city with lots of parks and museums. It could be an adventure. Anne, still apprehensive, murmured, what if we don't like it there? Can we come back? Thomas knelt in front of Anne. If it really doesn't work out, we'll find a solution. I promise. That's when Isabel surprised everyone. I could move too, she said hesitantly, to stay close to the girls. The silence that followed was broken by Sophie standing up abruptly. No, she shouted. You can't just decide to be part of our lives again. Not after everything. Isabel flinched as if slapped. Sophie, I just want what's best for you. What's best would have been never leaving, Sophie shouted, tears in her eyes, before running to her room. Thomas got up to follow her, but Isabel stopped him. Let me go, she said softly. I need to fix this. Isabel found Sophie in her room, sitting on the bed with her knees pulled up. She knocked softly on the open door. May I come in? Sophie shrugged, not looking at her mother. Isabel entered hesitantly and sat at the edge of the bed. Sophie, I know I hurt you deeply, Isabel began, and I understand your anger. You have every right to feel that way. Sophie finally looked at her, eyes red and swollen. Then why are you trying to force yourself back into our lives? Isabel took a deep breath. Because I love you. Because leaving was the worst mistake of my life, and I'm trying to fix it. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or to trust me. I just want the chance to be here, to be the mother you deserve. Sophie was silent for a long moment. What if you decide to leave again? She finally asked, her voice small and vulnerable. Isabel felt her heart break. Oh, Sophie, she said softly, I promise, with all my heart, that I will never leave again. I know words don't mean much right now, but let me show you with actions, day by day. Slowly, hesitantly, Sophie nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. When they returned to the living room, the family waited anxiously. Thomas gave Isabel a questioning look, and she nodded slightly. So, Thomas said, looking at each family member, what have we decided? Claire spoke first. I vote yes. I think it could be good for all of us. Anne, still clutching her teddy bear, murmured, okay, but can we visit here sometimes? Marie, always practical, asked, can I take all my toys? All eyes turned to Sophie. She took a deep breath, looking from Thomas to Isabel. All right, she said finally. But I have conditions. Thomas smiled, relieved and proud of his eldest daughter. Of course, sweetheart. Let's hear your conditions. As the family discussed the details of the move, Thomas couldn't help feeling a wave of hope. Brighton wouldn't be just a new city, but a new horizon for the Durand family. A horizon full of challenges, surely, but also of possibilities and, above all, renewed love. Thomas sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun slowly set on the horizon. The deadline for giving his answer to Mr. Peterson was approaching, and the pressure weighed on him like a ton of bricks. On the one hand, the promotion in Brighton offered financial stability and growth opportunities that would benefit the whole family. On the other hand, it meant uprooting the girls from the only home they knew, taking them away from friends and familiar routines. And then there was Isabel. As if conjured by his thoughts, the porch door opened and Sophie came out, hesitant. Dad, she called softly. Can we talk? Thomas smiled, gesturing for her to sit beside him. Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind? Sophie sat down, pulling her knees to her chest. For a moment, she seemed much younger than her 13 years. It's about the move, she began, her voice trembling slightly, and about Mom. Thomas felt his heart tighten. He knew this moment would come, but he still didn't feel ready. I'm listening, he said gently. Sophie took a deep breath. I'm scared, Dad. Scared that if we move, everything will change again. What if Mom comes and then decides to leave again? I can't go through that again. The tears Sophie had fought to contain finally overflowed. Thomas pulled her into a tight hug. feeling his own heart break at his daughter's pain. "Oh, Sophie," he whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you have to carry this fear." When Sophie finally calmed down, Thomas drew back gently, looking into her eyes. "I want you to know something, Sophie. No matter what happens, no matter where we go or who is in our lives, you'll always have me. Always. Understand?" Sophie nodded slowly. "But what about Mom? Do you really think she's changed?" Thomas sighed. "People can change, Sophie. Your mother is trying very hard, but I understand your concern. That's why whatever our decision, it will be based on what's best for you and your sisters. I promise." Sophie hugged her father again. "Thank you, Dad. I love you. I love you too, my brave girl." After Sophie went back inside, Thomas remained seated for a long time, lost in thought. His conversation with his eldest daughter solidified something in his mind. Any decision he made had to prioritize the girl's emotional well-being above all else. The next morning, Thomas called a family meeting. All the girls gathered in the living room, and Isabel arrived a few minutes later, looking nervous. "Thank you all for coming," Thomas began. "I know we've talked a lot about this move, and I think it's time to make a final decision." He paused, looking at Isabel. "But before that, Isabel, you mentioned you had something to say." Isabel stood, her hands trembling slightly. "Yes, I have a proposal." All eyes turned to her, curious and a bit apprehensive. "I know my presence here complicates things," Isabel began, "and I completely understand everyone's concerns, especially yours, Sophie." She looked directly at her eldest daughter, who looked away. "That's why I want to propose something." She took a deep breath before continuing. "If you decide to move to Brighton, I'd like to move there too, but not immediately. I'd stay here for a few months, giving you time to settle in. Then, if everyone is comfortable, I'd move there as well, but to my own apartment, close enough to be present in the girls' lives, but giving everyone the necessary space." A stunned silence fell over the room. Thomas was the first to break it. "Isabel, that's very considerate of you." Claire, ever the mediator, spoke next. "I think that's a good idea. It gives us time to adjust." Anne and Marie exchanged glances, looking a bit confused but not opposed. All eyes turned to Sophie. She remained silent for a long moment before speaking. "You promise?" she finally said, her voice small. "Promise you won't just disappear again?" Isabel knelt in front of Sophie, tears in her eyes. "Sophie, I promise, with all my heart, I will never abandon you again. I know words may not mean much now, but I'm committed to proving it to you, day by day." Sophie nodded slowly, not entirely convinced, but willing to give it a chance. Thomas observed the scene with mixed emotions, pride in his daughter's maturity, hope for Isabel's genuine effort, and renewed determination to do what was best for his family. "Well," he said finally, "I think it's time we made our final decision. Let's take a vote. Who's in favor of moving to Brighton with Isabel's proposed plan?" Slowly, one by one, hands were raised. First Claire, then Anne and Marie. Finally, after a moment's hesitation, Sophie raised her hand as well. Thomas felt a huge weight lift from his shoulders. "Then it's decided. We're going to Brighton." In the days that followed, Thomas immersed himself in preparations for the move. He informed Mr. Peterson of his decision, started looking for houses in Brighton, and organized the girls' school transfers. But amid the chaos of moving, he made sure to spend time with each daughter. Long talks with Sophie about her fears and hopes, researching attractions in Brighton with Claire, promising Anne they would visit old friends regularly, and countless stories for Marie about the adventures they would have in their new city. The night before they left, Thomas found Isabel waiting for him on the porch. "Thank you," she said softly, "for giving this a chance. For me, for our family." Thomas nodded. "It's not easy, Isabel, but I'm willing to try for the girls." "I know," she replied, "and I promise I won't disappoint you. Not this time." As they watched the sun set on the house that had been the stage of so many memories, both sweet and bitter, Thomas felt a mix of apprehension and hope. The decision was made. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it seemed bright with possibilities. Brighton would be more than just a new city. It would be a new beginning for the Durand family. A beginning Thomas hoped would bring healing, growth, and maybe even a chance to redefine what it meant to be a family. With one last look at the house they were leaving behind, Thomas turned to go inside, ready to face whatever the future held. Together, as a family. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen of the Durands' new home in Brighton. Thomas smiled to himself, enjoying the morning silence before the usual family chaos began. 3 months had passed since the move, and slowly the family was adjusting to their new life. Sophie, initially the most reluctant, had found a group of friends at her new school and was even considering joining the volleyball team. Anne, always an artist, was thrilled with the painting classes she had started attending. Marie, with her child's adaptability, already declared Brighton her favorite place in the whole world. And Claire, well, Claire had always been the easiest. At 13, she embraced the change with enthusiasm, exploring every corner of the city on her new bicycle. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced Sophie's arrival. "Morning, Dad," she murmured, still sleepy. "Good morning, sweetheart. Sleep well." Sophie nodded, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Thomas raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. At 15, his eldest insisted she was practically an adult. The rest of the morning followed their new normal. Anne couldn't find her pencil case. Marie insisted on wearing her rain boots despite the bright sunshine outside. And Claire, as always, was ready and waiting patiently at the door. After dropping the girls at school, Thomas headed to his new office. The work was challenging but rewarding. And then there was Emma. Emma Rogers was his assistant, a lively 38-year-old with a contagious smile and a laugh that lit up the entire room. In recent months, she had become not only a valuable colleague, but a close friend. "Good morning, Thomas," Emma greeted cheerfully. "Ready for the meeting with the investors?" Thomas smiled, feeling that familiar warmth Emma's presence always provoked. "With you by my side." Always. The morning passed quickly, filled with meetings and phone calls. During lunch, as Thomas and Emma shared a meal at the cafe near the office, his world turned upside down. His phone rang. It was the number from Claire's school. "Mr. Durand." The voice on the other end was tense, urgent. "There's been an accident. Claire, she was hit by a car while riding her bicycle. She's on her way to the hospital now." Thomas felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. I'm on my way," he stammered, standing up immediately. Emma, noticing something was wrong, immediately offered to drive. On the way to the hospital, Thomas made 2 calls, one to Isabel and another to the babysitter who looked after Marie after school, asking her to pick up Anne and Sophie. The hospital was a blur of white corridors and urgent voices. Thomas ran to the reception, his heart pounding in his chest. "Claire Durand," he gasped. "My daughter. She was brought in." Before the receptionist could reply, Thomas heard a familiar voice calling his name. It was Isabel, her face pale with worry. "Thomas, what happened? Where is she?" Together, they were informed that Claire was in surgery. She had suffered head trauma and multiple fractures. The next hours would be critical. Thomas collapsed into a chair in the waiting room, feeling as if the world was collapsing around him. Isabel sat beside him, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. "She'll be okay," Isabel murmured, more to herself than to Thomas. "She has to be." The hours dragged on. Sophie, Anne, and Marie arrived, brought by the babysitter. The shock and fear were evident on their young faces. "Dad?" Sophie's voice trembled. "Claire, will she—" Thomas pulled his eldest into a tight hug. "She's strong, Sophie. We have to believe." As night fell, tensions rose. The exhaustion and fear brought old hurts and insecurities to the surface. If we had stayed home, this never would have happened. Sophie exploded in a moment of frustration. "Sophie," Thomas admonished, but Isabel intervened. "No, she's right," Isabel said, her voice breaking. "If I had never left, if we hadn't moved—" "Stop!" Anne's surprisingly firm voice cut through the air. "It's nobody's fault. Claire needs us to be strong now." The silence that followed was broken only by Marie's quiet sobs in Thomas's lap. At that moment, Emma, who had stayed discreetly to offer support, approached with coffee for everyone. Her simple act of kindness seemed to disperse some of the tension in the air. As the night wore on, Thomas and Isabel found themselves forced to work together in a way they hadn't in years. They took turns comforting the girls, talking to the doctors, and holding the family together through the crisis. "Remember when Claire had chickenpox?" Isabel murmured during a quiet moment. "She was so afraid of the spots." Thomas nodded, a small smile on his lips. "We spent the whole night telling stories to distract her." For a moment, the weight of the years and past hurts seemed to dissipate, leaving only two parents united in their love and concern for their daughter. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, a doctor appeared. "Family of Claire Durand." Thomas and Isabel stood up at once, the girls waking from their restless dozes. "The surgery was a success," the doctor announced with a tired smile. "Claire is stable. She has a long recovery ahead, but we expect a full recovery." Relief flooded the room, almost palpable. Thomas found himself hugging Isabel, both of them crying with joy and exhaustion. Sophie, Anne, and Marie joined the embrace, forming a tight circle of love and gratitude. When they finally saw Claire, pale and fragile in her hospital bed but alive and fighting, Thomas felt a wave of emotions wash over him: gratitude, love, and renewed determination. Looking at his family gathered around Claire's bed, Isabel holding one daughter's hand, Sophie and Anne whispering words of encouragement, and Marie drawing a bright "Get well" card, Thomas realized that sometimes you have to almost lose something to truly appreciate what you have. Claire's accident had been a terrible shock, but it also served as a catalyst. Somehow, amid chaos and fear, they had rediscovered what it meant to be a family. As the sun rose over Brighton, bringing with it the promise of a new day, Thomas made a silent promise. No matter what the future held, they would face it together, as a family, stronger, more united, and more grateful than ever. The rhythmic sound of medical equipment filled the hospital room as Claire slowly opened her eyes. Thomas, who had been dozing in a chair beside the bed, immediately straightened up. "Hey, princess," he whispered, a tired but relieved smile lighting his face. "How are you feeling?" Claire blinked, confused. "Dad, what happened?" In the days that followed, the reality of the accident and the long road to recovery ahead set in. Claire faced not only the physical challenges of her injuries, but also the emotional struggles that came with her new reality. "I can't even hold a pencil properly," she cried in frustration during a therapy session, tears of anger and despair running down her face. Isabel, who was present that day, approached gently. "It's okay, sweetheart. It takes time. Remember when you were learning to ride a bike? It wasn't easy at first, but you didn't give up." Claire looked at her mother, a flash of recognition in her eyes. It was the first time in years Isabel had mentioned a childhood memory without tension filling the air. The family quickly established a rotation to care for Claire. Thomas adjusted his work schedule, relying on the understanding and support of his superiors. Isabel practically moved into the hospital, sleeping on an uncomfortable sofa night after night. Sophie, now 15, surprised everyone with her maturity and dedication. She took on many household responsibilities, looking after Anne and Marie while the parents focused on Claire. One evening, Thomas found Sophie in the kitchen, preparing dinner for her younger sisters. "You don't have to do all this, sweetheart," he said softly. "You're still just a teenager." Sophie shrugged, but Thomas could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "Someone has to do it, Dad, and you and Mom have enough to worry about." Thomas pulled his daughter into a tight hug, feeling a mix of pride and guilt. "You're amazing, you know that. But promise me you'll tell me if it becomes too much, okay?" Sophie nodded against her father's chest, allowing herself, for a moment, to be just a scared girl who almost lost her sister. Meanwhile, Isabel demonstrated a dedication that even surprised Thomas. She attended every medical appointment, every therapy session, every difficult moment. Slowly, the girls began to see a side of their mother that had been overshadowed by years of absence and hurt. One afternoon, Anne arrived at the hospital with a drawing for Claire. Seeing Isabel help Claire with mobility exercises, Anne hesitated in the doorway. "Come in, sweetheart," Isabel called softly. "Claire would love to see your drawing." Anne approached timidly, handing the paper to Claire. To her surprise, Isabel gently pulled her into a hug. "What a beautiful drawing, Anne. You've always been our little artist." Anne's hesitant smile was like a ray of sunshine after a long storm. Thomas, watching the scene, felt his heart tighten. Seeing Isabel with the girls, caring for them with so much love, he couldn't help but reconsider many of his assumptions and fears. In the midst of it all, Emma proved to be an invaluable pillar of support. She not only took on many of Thomas's responsibilities at work, allowing him to focus on his family, but also became a constant, reassuring presence for all of them. One night, when Thomas was particularly exhausted and discouraged, Emma showed up at the hospital with homemade food and a sympathetic ear. "You don't have to go through this alone, Thomas," she said softly. Her eyes filled with understanding and something more that Thomas wasn't ready to name yet. The arrival of Mrs. Thompson was like a balm for the exhausted family. The elderly neighbor, who had become almost a grandmother figure, insisted on traveling from her hometown as soon as she heard about the accident. "Well, well," she said as she entered Claire's room, her arms full of bags. "What do we have here? A young warrior, I see." Claire couldn't help but smile, the first genuine smile in days. Mrs. Thompson had that effect on people. In the days that followed, Mrs. Thompson became a constant source of wisdom and comfort. She had stories to distract Claire during painful therapy sessions, gentle advice for Sophie when the pressure seemed too great, and encouraging words for Thomas and Isabel when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them. One evening, Thomas found Mrs. Thompson and Isabel talking quietly in the hospital cafeteria. "My dear," Mrs. Thompson said, holding Isabel's hand, "forgiveness is a journey, not a destination. You're on the right path." Isabel wiped away a tear, nodding. Seeing Thomas, she offered a small smile, a gesture of mutual peace and understanding. As the weeks passed, small miracles began to happen. Claire took her first hesitant steps with crutches. Sophie was caught laughing with Isabel over an embarrassing childhood story. Anne asked her mother for help on a school art project. Thomas, watching his family come together in ways he never imagined possible a few months ago, felt a surge of gratitude and hope. Claire's accident had been a terrible event, but from the ashes of that tragedy, something beautiful was being born, a renewed family, stronger and more united than ever. One afternoon, with everyone gathered in Claire's hospital room, Sophie reading a book aloud, Anne drawing, Marie playing quietly on the floor, Isabel helping Claire with physiotherapy exercises, and Emma bringing snacks, Thomas found himself looking at Mrs. Thompson. The elderly lady smiled as if reading his thoughts. "See, my dear," she said softly, "sometimes things must break completely to be rebuilt stronger than before." Thomas nodded, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in years. The road ahead would still be long and, no doubt, full of challenges. But looking at his reunited family, he knew they would face it all together. United not just by blood, but by bonds of love, forgiveness and resilience tested in fire and forged stronger than ever. The aroma of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled the Durand home in Brighton. Snowflakes fell gently outside, creating a scene worthy of a Christmas card. Thomas watched from the living room window, a cup of hot chocolate in his hand, as Claire helped Marie build a snowman in the yard. A year had passed since the terrible accident that almost took Claire from them. Now fully recovered, she was the center of attention and Christmas celebrations. "They've grown so much," a soft voice said behind him. Thomas turned to see Isabel, her eyes shining with nostalgia and joy. "Yes, they have," he agreed, feeling a wave of gratitude for having her there, part of their lives again, even if in a different way. The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of guests. Sophie, now 16, ran to answer. "Mrs. Thompson," she exclaimed, hugging the elderly neighbor who had become such an important part of their lives. Gradually, the house filled up. Emma arrived, bringing a homemade apple pie, her smile lighting up the room. Anne, now 10, proudly showed off her latest artistic creations to anyone who cared to look. When everyone was gathered in the living room, Thomas asked for their attention. "Before we start our dinner, I'd like us to share a moment of reflection, he said, his voice thick with emotion. This past year has taught us a lot about love, forgiveness, and the true strength of family. Claire, sitting among her sisters, nodded, tears shining in her eyes. I want to thank all of you, she began hesitantly, for not giving up on me, for standing by me every step of the recovery. Sophie surprised everyone by speaking next. I want to apologize, she said, looking directly at Isabel, for being so harsh, so inflexible. Mom, seeing how you cared for Claire, how you've been there for all of us, I understand now. And I forgive you, Isabel sobbed openly, pulling Sophie into a tight embrace. Anne and Marie joined them, creating an emotional Durand knot in the middle of the room. Thomas watched the scene, his heart overflowing with love and gratitude. He exchanged a meaningful look with Emma, who nodded encouragingly. Family, he called softly, there's something else we'd like to share with you today. He held out his hand to Emma, who approached, intertwining her fingers with his. Emma and I, well, we've fallen in love, and we'd like all of your blessings for us to get married. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, to everyone's surprise, it was Isabel who spoke first. Thomas, Emma, she said, her voice steady despite her tears, you have my full blessing. Emma, thank you for caring for this family when I couldn't, for loving these girls as if they were your own. The girls, one by one, expressed their joy and acceptance. Claire even joked, it's about time, Dad. The Christmas dinner that followed was filled with laughter, stories, and a palpable sense of love and unity. Mrs. Thompson shared stories of past Christmases, making everyone laugh at her youthful escapades. Emma and Isabel, to everyone's surprise, found they had much in common and were soon exchanging recipes and gardening tips. Later, when the younger girls were in bed and the adults enjoyed one last glass of wine by the fireplace, Thomas found himself reflecting on the incredible journey they had taken. You know, he said softly, watching the dancing flames, a few years ago, I thought my life was over. When Isabel left that Christmas Eve, I felt like everything was falling apart. Isabel lowered her eyes, guilt still visible, but Thomas continued. And then, when Claire had her accident, I thought it was the end of the world. But look at us now. He made a broad gesture, encompassing everyone in the room. Somehow, those apparent tragedies led us to this moment. They taught us about forgiveness, growth, and a deeper, stronger love than I ever imagined. Emma squeezed his hand gently, her eyes shining with love and understanding. Isabel smiled, a genuine smile of friendship and acceptance. To the future, Thomas proposed a toast, raising his glass, to new beginnings, unconditional love, and the strength of family. To the future, everyone echoed, their glasses clinking softly. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Brighton with a white blanket of possibilities. Inside the Durand home, the warmth of family love drove away any chill. This Christmas marked not just the end of a challenging year, but the start of a new chapter filled with hope, forgiveness, and renewed love. Thomas looked around at his extended and diverse family, his daughters, Isabel, Emma, Mrs. Thompson, and felt a profound sense of peace and contentment. The path that led them here was winding and often painful, but every step was worth it to arrive at this moment of redemption and joy. As the clock struck midnight, officially announcing Christmas Day, Thomas made a silent promise to keep this spirit of love, forgiveness, and gratitude alive, not just during the holidays, but every day of the coming year. For now he knew more than ever that the true miracle of Christmas lay in the unbreakable bonds of family, whether formed by blood or by choice. And as he embraced his loved ones, Thomas felt certain that, whatever the future held, they would face it together, with love, resilience, and the unshakable strength of family.